based on optimistic assumptions that constitutes a ticking time bomb in Oregon governance and Oregon economics. The Supreme Court ruling of yesterday basically failed to knock over the house of cards. And there are several reasons why we hold this opinion. We have an intact system by which Tier 1 employees will continue to earn an 8% return minimum a year, regardless of what happens to the PERS retirement fund. This is an inherently unstable situation. It is based on a number of assumptions. For example, if there is another terrorist attack, if there is another stock market upheaval, such as we saw after the internet bubble burst, if there is any sort of economic dislocation at all, then what we're going to find is poor market performance, and once again, PERS will be responsible for paying this 8% return regardless of what happens to the PERS fund or whatever returns it is able to earn or not earn. And even as it sits now, local, municipal governments and special districts are still required to pay substantial amounts into the PERS fund. This bleeds money away from transportation, schools, social services, and a lot of other popular government programs. What this has basically done is put the problem off into the future. It's basically a way of saying the economy is okay now, the shortfall has been largely recovered, we don't have to do anything. And it provides politicians with a way to get out of the current legislative session in a timely manner and allow other politicians to deal with it in the future if, in fact, there is a problem. This is not responsible. PERS is inherently unstable. Fixing it is like trying to put Skylab back into orbit. And the fact that it's not taking us out now doesn't mean it's not going to hurt us in the future. This is something that libertarians, the Libertarian Party, and its candidates have been talking about for years. I have a press kit here for everyone, if they would like one. And it has two sides. One side contains copies of the various press releases and position papers put out by our candidates. The earliest one is Mitch Schultz, who ran for state treasurer in 2000. He was endorsed by the Salem Statesman Journal, and he was the first to say that PERS needed structural reform, namely turning it into a defined contribution plan. This has been supported by a variety of politicians from a variety of parties, and that is where we need to go now. Rather than say the problem is fixed, let's not worry about it, the future will take care of itself, we need to use this respite that the Oregon Supreme Court gave us to make the structural reforms so that we will not have a ticking time bomb in the future to deal with. On the right side of the press kit is a list of some of our suggestions. Tom Cox, who will be here momentarily, will go over these suggestions in detail. There's also some information from the Cascade Policy Institute that goes over the benefits of turning PERS into a defined contribution plan. And there is also going to be an event on the 11th on that very topic that is also sponsored by the Cascade Policy Institute. In essence, the suggestions that we're putting forward are to effectively end PERS, replacing it with a defined contribution plan. Until PERS is replaced, allow local governments and municipalities to opt out of PERS in that way if the state does not decide to do it entirely. And until PERS is replaced, allow local governments, municipalities, and state agents to declare a special bankruptcy that would end all employment contracts. I see that Tom Cox is here, and so at this point I will turn the podium over to him. He will go over these reforms in greater detail. Yes. Sure.
When does it end? I mean, when does the criticism of PERS end? I mean, the legislature went through this whole convoluted and gut-wrenching political process in 2003 and ratcheted the whole program down within certain legal limits. When does the criticism of PERS stop?
That's a good question, and it stops when one of several things happen. One, when PERS is fully funded and it is stable. That means it does not have structural structural features in place which will allow a fluctuating economy to put us in a position of once again having an unfunded liability. When it no longer can threaten the future of Oregon by creating a situation where we would have to invoke the General Obligation Debt Bonding Authority, which was allowed by ballot measure 29. And when public employees are able to realize a comfortable retirement from a system that is not vulnerable to political manipulation. We don't enjoy coming up here and criticizing the public employee retirement system, and we don't hate public employees. A lot of us have family members and friends, and there are numerous members of the Libertarian Party who are themselves public employees and members of the PERS system. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we don't want the PERS system to hurt Oregon. We don't want Oregon to hurt public employees.
What's still in the system? I mean, one of the things that was upheld by the Supreme Court was the successor system, which eventually all public employees would be on, which is a defined contribution plan.
Yes.
I mean, why not just let that work itself out? Do you see structural flaws in the remaining PERS members under the current system that's slowly, going to be going away, that still could lead to the kind of instability you're talking about?
Well, of course, the 8% return for the Tier 1 employees.
Maximum as well as a minimum, right?
Well, that's, at this point, I can't answer this question, but my expertise on these matters is not as high as Tom Cox, who, has much more financial experience than I do, and I'd prefer to defer to him. So, Tom, come on up.
Sure.
Could you restate your question for me?
Well, I guess my question was two parts. One is, won't the new system that they created for new hires and also allows existing people too, for their contributions, which is a defined contribution plan, going forward, isn't that going to solve the problem? And if it doesn't, what is it that's still in the, declining membership of existing systems that does create instability you're talking
Well,
about?
there's a couple. You've got a misapprehension. You believe that the new system that came into play in 2003 was defined contributions. It's a hybrid. It includes some defined benefits features. That's a potential problem. Any defined benefit system, and you can look at what Alan Greenspan has to say on this, or Stigler, or any of the Nobel Prize-winning economists who have talked about different kinds of pension plans. If it's defined benefits, there will always be pressure on the people guarding the system to sweeten the pot during the good years because, hey, the times are good, they'll always be good, because memories are short. It happened to the steel industry, it happened to the automotive industry, it happened to the airline industry, it's happened all over the private sector, and they have paid for it. And we've seen time and again where in the private sector, unions that have been extremely powerful have managed in good times to get such sweetheart deals that they have driven their companies into bankruptcy. Orange County, California declared bankruptcy. City of New York declared bankruptcy. That is not a road we want Oregon to go down. And as long as there are defined benefit plans for public agencies in Oregon, the risk is there.
In other words, you still have the formula system, which if that
You've
gets
got a couple of
better
different things.
they'll get it.
Yeah, the money match has not gone away. There's a number of things. And remember that anybody hired in '96 or prior, which wasn't that long ago, less than 10 years, it's Tier 1. And plenty of those people, and boy, they got such a sweetheart deal. Why would they ever leave? So I can promise you they're going to want to stick around as long as they can, or unless they see a big, there's a big wave of retirements in '03.
Doesn't the 8% as both, a floor and a ceiling, I guess, when we look at it, I mean, doesn't that sort of guarantee stability over the long term?
It does put some controls in place if they stick. But let's have 2, 3, 4 good years of stock market returns in a row, and we went from, I believe it was an $8 billion unfunded liability, $7 billion unfunded 2-3 years ago. We just heard from Dennis Richardson yesterday that it's down to 1.7, I think, billion. Oh, terrific! It's all fixed, right? How quickly we forget.
But, Tom, though, it went from like 7 to 1.5, just purely by the stock market. I mean,
Purely by the
this is-
stock market,
this
and
is
what
over
the
20
stock market giveth, the stock market can taketh away.
So, but I mean-
So it's not just that, it's also going to be, let's have 8 years of solid stock market performance. What's going to happen to the 8% cap? Oh, that was from back in '03. Yeah, we're so much smarter now. And that 8 will get pushed away. Oh, they're going to give up their cost of living step increase bonus frill in exchange for us lifting that 8% cap. That's so 2003. We don't need that anymore because it's now 2012 and we're all so much smarter now. So yeah, the 8% cap is terrific as long as it sticks around. But again, there's no guarantee of that. If you've got defined benefits or you've got the ability for the legislature to tweak and manipulate, the next time somebody wants some extra votes, it's going to be back on the table. And the only real protection that the workers have is for them to own their own retirement system, to own the accounts, not to have them in a pot where they've got supposed rights to it. Because under Oregon law today, if PERS is ended today, the current workers, not the retirees who must remain untouched, the current workers are only entitled to the benefits that are funded, not the promise, not the money match, and nothing else.
How realistic is it to think that the legislature would come anywhere near meddling with this again after they've just botched this?
Now that the heat is off, why on earth would they pick it up again? It's a good question. This is the difference between leadership and political expediency. If we've got a Capitol building full of wind socks, right? People who are going to, look at the prevailing breeze and go, oh, well, the pressure's off this way, the pressure's that way, I'll point that way for a while. No, it may not happen. But it is the job of a political party like ours, it's the job of somebody like me who looks to the long-term health of the state to point out the long-term as well as the short-term issues. And if I'm the only person all year who says this and I turn out to be right, I'm going to say, I told you so. I feel like Cassandra sometimes. The Greek prophet who was cursed by Zeus to always be right and never be believed. And I don't know that I'm always right, but on PERS, libertarians have been consistently right. We've been consistently ahead of the curve. And folks have got to start listening to us. And the voters will certainly hear from us again. If and when this heads south, we're going to be here to say, here in 2005, here's Tom Cox saying this. In 02 we said it. In the year 2000 we said it. We are very serious about the fiscal health of this government and the fiscal health of our state. And that's our job, is to take sometimes unpopular stands, but to look for the long-term health.
Are you running again for governor?
No comment.
Do you think that what Karen Minnis and the governor and, well, basically all the top officials are going to make on PERS in the end somehow colors what it is that their reforms are going to be and their perception of how things are going?
It's kind of a political question. Richard, you want to field that?
Well, I'm not going to accuse either Speaker Minnis or anyone else of acting in bad faith or just looking out for their own interests. But over the long haul, there is an inherent conflict of interest. And there are tremendous incentives in place to, avoid moving PERS away from the over-generous plan it is, or the unstable plan it is, as long as they get the benefits. And that's why I'd like to address a question that you brought up, Colin, and that is, do we expect the legislature to make these fundamental reforms? And the answer is, well, actually, no, we don't expect them to make the fundamental reforms. It seems like, both Republicans and Democrats alike put off making difficult decisions until there is no choice anymore. And right now they have a choice. And so this may be something that needs to be done through the initiative process. I think that if an organization like Freedom Works or some other organization were to get behind this, at least through statute, be able to implement some of the changes that we're advocating now, and that might be the way to go, if not this year, next year, or some other time, hopefully before we have some major fluctuation in the market and we find ourselves back in the situation where we have a $17 billion liability.
Do you think that the court ruling yesterday means that, puts such limitations on what the legislature can do really statutorily to fix the system that you, in your thinking, that you really need to start over with a different kind of system, which can only really be done by completely eliminating or terminating the current system. I think that's what that means.
I think that it needs to be, and we've been saying that. For many years we've conceded that PERS probably cannot be changed, but it can be ended and replaced with something else. And that is essentially what we're doing. Before Tom came in, I asked him to make a couple of comments about the reforms. You've heard about the defined contribution plan, but I'd like him to discuss for a moment the bankruptcy change that we have included in our press kit.
One of the things that has come up from folks other than the state government, in particular in Hillsborough, where I live, the Hillsborough School District, the City of Hillsborough, Washington County, there are a number of public agencies, a number of governments that face incredible pressures from the PERS system on their finances. We've got a deficit in Hillsborough for the second year running now, and it's attributable 100% to the incredible uptick in PERS costs. What happens to these folks when there's another problem, like the one we've just gotten through, that we think is over, that we hope is over? There's no exit built into PERS, and we need to add one. There's a couple ways to do that. We should allow localities to opt out of PERS, and we, more than anything else, I believe, need to allow those public agencies that are truly strapped and whose mission is being compromised by the financial pressures of PERS to restructure their debts through a form of bankruptcy that would end employment contracts that they can no longer afford. It would be the equivalent of giving every employee simultaneously a pink slip and a new job offer and switch them to a new plan. And that would end the current employment contracts. That would get the Tier 1 employees off PERS. They would get the cash value of their accounts. They could roll those over. They can get put on a system that was sustainable and maintainable.
What do you think about some of these retired school district people, folks who have been on PERS a while, making 120, 30, 40, 50,000 in retirement? Just thought about that.
I'd like to tell them that Hillsborough is a beautiful place to retire to. I want to really encourage them to look at moving out into Hillsborough. We'd love to have them there. But if you're retired, your benefits cannot, should not, must not be touched. It is immoral to change someone's retirement system after they retired.
I'd like to add something to this, too. We talk a lot about priorities in this state, and we say that nothing is more important than our children's schools. Nothing is more important than public safety. Nothing is more important than health care or social services or whatever it is. Well, if we really believe that, this is where the rubber hits the road, because we have two priorities in direct conflict. We have the priority of the benefits of those who belong to PERS versus the priority of schools and other social services funded by government. And when the PERS contributions, particularly coming from local and municipal governments, comes into conflict with our children, our elderly, and other vulnerable people, we have to pick which one is most important. Well, we certainly don't want to throw our retirees under the bus, but we have to make a choice with a finite number of dollars, and the Libertarian Party is saying, and as cheesy as it may sound, choose our kids. So.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
New York back in the mid-'70s.
Right.
They had the same kind of troubles. From what I understand, they're still paying off the bonds related to what had occurred. But how did they reform? How did they get themselves out of it?
Boy, that is a long story. We're not going to have time here. If you want to get together with me afterwards, I'd love to get into it in detail with you.
All right.
But thank you very much. Thank you all.